You're not lazy. You've never been lazy, but you are addicted. And the addiction has been making real work feel neurologically impossible before you even start. Here's what's actually happening when you can't make yourself begin. It's not a character flaw. It's not a discipline failure. It's not evidence that you don't want it badly enough. It's a hijacked reward system running a chemical calculation, and real work keeps losing. Every time. Not because you're weak, because the calculation is rigged. Your dopamine system was built for a world that no longer exists. It was designed around one principle. Effort produces reward. Hunt, build, solve, create. And the system releases dopamine as both the motivator and the payoff. The effort was the point. The uncertainty was what made the reward land. That architecture produced some of the most driven, creative, relentlessly productive humans in history. Then the environment changed. Overnight, in evolutionary terms, infinite stimulation became available on demand. Scroll and receive, click and receive, watch and receive, dopamine without effort, reward without pursuit, chemical payoff without the friction that made it meaningful. And your nervous system did exactly what it was designed to do. It adapted. It downregulated receptor sensitivity to compensate for the excess input. It raised the threshold required to feel motivated. It recalibrated the baseline so that the low-effort, high-stimulation inputs, the scroll, the click, the watch, started to feel normal. And the high-effort, low-stimulation inputs, the deep work, the creative output, the uncomfortable pursuit of something real, started to feel almost impossible to initiate. Not because the work got harder, because your reward threshold moved. Here's the mechanism. 3 of them. None of them are about willpower. Mechanism 1, dopamine baseline collapse. Mechanism 2, the initiation wall. Mechanism 3, the shame loop. Mechanism 1, dopamine baseline collapse. Every high stimulation input raises the dopamine floor temporarily, and then drops it below where it started. This is the mechanism behind every chemical dependency. The spike produces the crash produces the craving produces the next spike, and the baseline, the level of dopamine present in your system during neutral, unstimulated moments, drops lower with every cycle. What this means in practice. The moments between stimulation, the quiet moments, the unstructured time, the space where real creative work lives, start to feel worse than they used to. Not dramatically, not like withdrawal in the clinical sense, just a low-grade flatness, a restlessness, a vague sense that something is missing that you can't quite name. And your nervous system knows exactly how to fix it. One click, one scroll, one hit of incoming stimulation, and the flatness lifts for approximately 11 minutes before it drops again. You're not procrastinating because you lack discipline. You're medicating a dopamine deficit with the fastest available source. And real work, slow, uncertain, effortful, unrewarded for hours or days or weeks, cannot compete with that source, not when the baseline has collapsed, not without recalibration. Mechanism 2, the initiation wall. There is a specific neurological event that has to occur before effortful work can begin. The prefrontal cortex has to override the limbic system's preference for the path of least resistance. In a calibrated nervous system, this override is available and accessible. It requires effort, but it's executable. In a chronically overstimulated nervous system, the override becomes a wall, not a metaphorical wall, a measurable increase in the neurological cost of initiating effortful action. The resistance you feel when you sit down to work and cannot start. The heaviness, the sudden awareness of everything else that needs doing, the compulsion to check one more thing before you begin. That's not weakness. That's the initiation wall. built brick by every low-effort dopamine hit that trained your system to expect reward without friction. And here's what makes it feel like laziness from the inside. The wall is invisible. You can't see it. You can only feel the resistance it produces. And when you feel resistance and can't identify the source, the mind reaches for the most available explanation. I don't want it badly enough. I'm not disciplined enough. I'm lazy. None of those are true. The wall is real. The source is architectural. And architectural problems require architectural solutions. Mechanism 3, the shame loop. This is the mechanism that locks everything else in place. When you feel the resistance and label it laziness, something shifts in your nervous system. Shame activates. And shame is one of the most powerful threat responses the nervous system can generate. It activates the same neural pathways as physical danger. It floods the system with cortisol. It takes the prefrontal cortex, already compromised by the dopamine deficit, already struggling against the initiation wall, and drops it further offline, making the next attempt harder, making the next failure more likely, making the shame on the other side of that failure more intense. That's the loop. Resistance, mislabeled as laziness, produces shame, which produces cortisol, which reduces prefrontal capacity, which increases resistance, which confirms the laziness narrative. And the ceiling holds. Not because you chose it, because the loop runs automatically, below the level of conscious awareness, until someone names it precisely enough that you can see it from the outside. You've been inside this loop. You know the specific version of it that runs in your life, the project you keep almost starting, the goal you've reset 3 times this year, the version of yourself you can see clearly and cannot seem to reach. You've called that gap laziness. It was never laziness. It was a hijacked reward system running a loop you were never given the architecture to interrupt. Here's what interrupting it actually requires. Not motivation. Motivation is a dopamine output. You can't motivate your way to dopamine when the system that produces it is compromised. Not discipline. Discipline is a regulated nervous system output. You can't discipline your way out of a chemical deficit. Not accountability. Accountability is external pressure applied to an internal architecture problem. It produces temporary compliance and permanent resentment. 3 architectural interventions, in sequence. First, rebuild the dopamine baseline. Effort before reward, without exception, starting tomorrow, not forever, not as punishment, as recalibration. Every morning the phone stays down until the first real work is done. Every reward, every scroll, every piece of incoming stimulation is earned through prior output. Not because this is morally superior, because every repetition of effort before reward is a signal to your dopamine system that effort produces reward. And every repetition rebuilds the architecture that makes effortful work feel pursuable again. This is uncomfortable for approximately 7 to 10 days. Then the baseline starts to shift. The flatness between stimulation sessions reduces. The initiation wall gets lower. The work becomes something the system moves toward rather than away from. Not because you became more disciplined, because you rebuilt the architecture that discipline comes from. Second, eliminate the shame diagnosis. The laziness label has to go. Not through affirmations, not through positive self-talk, through accurate re-diagnosis. Every time the resistance fires, every moment of procrastination, every failure to initiate, every afternoon lost to the scroll, the accurate diagnosis is dopamine deficit activating, initiation wall elevated, architectural problem, not I'm lazy, not I don't want it enough, not something is wrong with me. The accurate diagnosis creates distance between the resistance and the shame loop. Distance is where the architecture can be changed. Shame closes the loop. Precision opens it. Third, lower the initiation threshold deliberately. The initiation wall is real. You cannot will yourself over it when the dopamine baseline is depleted and the cortisol is elevated. But you can lower it by reducing the size of the first action until it's smaller than the wall, not the full project, the first sentence, not the full workout, the first set, not the full conversation, the first message. The nervous system's initiation cost is calculated based on perceived total effort. Reduce the perceived total effort to its minimum viable unit. And the wall drops. The first action produces the first dopamine signal. The first dopamine signal makes the second action easier. The second action makes the third. And the momentum that felt impossible to generate 5 minutes ago is now running on its own. Not because you became more motivated, because you understood the architecture well enough to work with it instead of against it. The person who looks like they have limitless motivation from the outside isn't wired differently than you. They didn't receive a dopamine system you weren't given. They have an architecture, either accidentally built through environment or deliberately constructed through recalibration, that makes effortful pursuit feel like what the system wants to do. The work feels like relief to them, not because they're exceptional, because their baseline is calibrated to treat effort as reward. That baseline is not fixed. It was built. And what was built can be rebuilt. You were never lazy. You were running on a compromised architecture in an environment specifically designed to compromise it further. Every app, every platform, every piece of content engineered for maximum engagement was optimized to exploit the exact vulnerability in your dopamine system that makes real work feel hard. You were never the problem. The environment was the variable. And environments can be changed. If this landed harder than it should have, that's not an accident. Day 1 of the protocol exposes your exact dopamine drain points, the specific inputs that have been collapsing your baseline before you even sit down to work. Most people have never mapped them with precision. They know they get distracted. They don't know exactly what's draining the system before the distraction even starts. That's why the recalibration never sticks. Over 30 days, you rebuild the dopamine baseline, dismantle the initiation wall, and close the shame loop permanently, not through motivation, but through architectural recalibration your current system has never been given. Here's what happens without it. Tomorrow morning, the phone is there. The flatness is there. The wall is there. You'll sit down to work and feel the resistance and reach for the fastest available source. And somewhere underneath it, the laziness narrative runs again. Not because it's true, because the loop was never interrupted. If you want the work to stop feeling like a fight against yourself, the architecture is in my bio. It's the only place I'm giving it. Calibration.